guys, so now that it is May 2015, I'm finally bringing you my top 5 books of 2014, and I mean, it's gotten to the point where we're over a third of the way through 2015, but you know what? I had made the list in December of 2014, and I just never filmed the video, and I thought, I'm just gonna film it for you now. So all of these are series, except one of them, which is from a series, but I only read the first book and half of the second book. So these are the basically top 5 series that I read for the first time in 2014. And let's get started. The first series I read in, I think, maybe March of 2014, March or April. It is the Protector of the Small series by Tamora Pierce. It's actually 4 books, but I don't own the first book yet. Tamora Pierce is one of my favorite authors of all time, if not my favorite author of all time. I basically, like, worship at her feet, and she is just the best thing ever. I love her. She writes a ton of high fantasy books with kick-ass female protagonists, and this series is no exception, but don't start with this series. So these take place, she writes in 2 universes. They are Tortall and Emlyn, and in her Tortall universe she has a bunch of series in that, which start with the Song of the Lioness Quartet, then the Immortals Quartet, then this quartet, which is the Protector of the Small Quartet. And I guess I'll just hold up the last book because I don't have the first book. So the books in the Protector of the Small Quartet are First Test, which I don't own yet, but I'll put the cover here. Page, Squire, and the last book, Lady Knight. These follow Calandri of Mindolin, who wants to train to be a knight, and in other previous series, which you should read first, the first series follows Alana, a girl who has to disguise herself as a boy to train to be a knight because girls can't train to be knights. This is later on. Alana is now an adult, and a new decree has just been passed that girls are allowed to train to be knights, but she's the first girl to train to be a knight, so she faces a lot of prejudices because she's the only girl, and a lot of people don't believe that she can do it. So it just follows her training throughout being a page and a squire and a knight, and she is one of my favorite protagonists that I've ever read. I just really appreciate her, and this is in a high fantasy world, but she actually doesn't have any magic, unlike the protagonists of the 2 previous series that take place in this world. And you really should read those first because the characters from those 2 are in this. So it will have a lot of spoilers for the previous 2 series if you read this series first. But they were amazing. I love the main character, and the message, really, like, she always goes out of her way to do stuff for others who can't defend themselves. So, like, she once would have to redo 4 years worth of training, but she had to go protect someone who had been kidnapped, so she did that instead. Like, she's just amazing. And one thing that I really appreciate about her is that, unlike the other protagonists in the other series, she herself doesn't have magic. So even though other characters have magic, she doesn't have magic. She basically has to rely on her fighting skills and her leadership ability. She has really good leadership ability, and it's just an amazing series that I would highly recommend. I mean, it's Tamora Pierce, guys. If you've watched basically like any video on my channel, you know that I will just gush about Tamora Pierce until the end of time. But this was an amazing series that I read for the first time this year. But read the Song of the Lioness Quartet and the Immortals Quartet first, and then read the Protector of the Small Quartet, which was amazing. By the way, these aren't in any particular order. I'm not going to rank them. They're just the top 5 series I read for the first time in 2014. Not in any particular order. So another series which I read for the first time in spring of 2014 was also by Tamora Pierce, my queen, which is the Becca Cooper trilogy. So this is really interesting because these books take place about 200 years before the first quartet. So I told you that she writes in Tortall and Emlyn, these 2 different universes, and she has lots of different series in Tortall. So she has the Song of the Lioness Quartet, the Immortals Quartet, the Protector of the Small Quartet, then a Trickster duology, right? Those are in the present time. But this trilogy takes place 200 years before the Song of the Lioness. So it's about one of the ancestors of one of the characters of the Song of the Lioness Quartet. And it is the Becca Cooper trilogy. The first book is Terrier, the second book is Bloodhound, and the third book is Mastiff. These books follow Becca Cooper. She's training to be a policewoman in the criminal underworld of the capital of Tortall in what was 200 years before the other series. So she's an ancestor of one of the characters from the other books. It's basically just like her dealing with the gritty underworld, the gritty criminal underworld. It says, hundreds of years before Alana first drew her sword in Tamora Pierce's memorable debut, Alana the First Adventure, Tortall had a heroine named Becca Cooper, a fierce young woman who fights crime in a world of magic. This is the beginning of her story, her legend, and her legacy. Becca Cooper is a rookie with the law-enforcing Provost Guard, commonly known as the Provost Dogs in Chorus, the capital city of Tortall. To the surprise of both veteran dogs and her fellow puppies who are training to be Provost Dogs, Becca requests duty in the Lower City. The Lower City is a tough beat, but it's also where Becca was born and she's comfortable there. Becca gets her wish. She's assigned to work with Mattis and Clary, famed veterans of the Provost Dogs. They're tough, they're capable, and they're not too happy about the indignity of being saddled with a puppy for the first time in years. But what they don't know is that Becca has something unique to offer. Never much of a talker, Becca is a good listener, so good in fact that she hears things that Mattis and Clary never could. Information that is passed in murmurs when flocks of pigeons gather. Murmurs that are words of the dead. So she has magic that allows her to hear basically ghosts who ride on the back of pigeons, and also she can create these whirlwind things that pick up sounds. So it's really cool. Her magic is really cool. In this way, Becca learns of someone in the Lower City who has overturned the power structure of the underworld and is terrorizing its citizens into submission and silence. Becca's magical listening talent is the only way for the Provost Dogs to find out the identity of this brutal new underlord, for the dead are beyond fear. And the ranks of the dead will be growing if the dogs can't solve a crime wave of the likes of which has never been seen. Luckily for the people of the Lower City, the new puppy is a true terrier. So, I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy with the slang of the police unit, but this series was great. She's a great protagonist, she is badass, and she has cool magic, and it's really cool because it kind of focuses on the gritty criminal underworld versus like royalty or whatever. It's more like the gritty stuff. So these were great. I loved them. They were amazing. Especially the third one. The cover of the third one's kind of bad, but the third one was my favorite. In the third one, she kind of has to go on a journey of sorts, so she's not staying in the same city. But the third one was exceptionally good, but I loved all of them. So yes, that was the Becca Cooper trilogy. And I guess these you could read without having read any of the other quartets first because they take place in the past. But I mean, I would suggest reading the series in Tortall in the order that she wrote them in, but you could get away with reading these without having read the Woos first. Another series that I read and completely loved in 2014 was the Seven Realms series by Cinda Williams Shima, and I will put the covers here. So I read this series in October and they were amazing, amazing, amazing. They were great young adult high fantasy. The first book is The Demon King. It follows two main characters, Han Alistair, who's a reformed thief, and Race Anne Maria, who is the crown princess of the realm. And in the beginning of the book, Han is with his friend Fire Dancer in the woods, and three young wizards have set fire to the forest, and in order to stop them, Han and Dancer have to take away this amulet that they have, which then they discover is this very important, dangerous amulet that Han has to protect from all these people who want to track it down, and the story goes on from there. It follows dual perspective, different chapters from Han and Race's perspective, and it is one of the best YA high fantasies that I've read in a very long time. It is amazing, and I would highly, highly recommend the entire series to anyone who loves fantasy, anyone who loves YA fantasy, and anyone who wants to read a good series, basically. They were amazing. In September, I read the Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. That is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo, and Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. These were absolutely amazing, so good. This is basically high fantasy with a kick-ass female lead, and it is in a fantasy world called Ravka, which is highly influenced by Russian cultural elements, although it is not Russia. And our main character, Alina, and her best friend Mal are in the military of Ravka, and they have to pass this dark, shadowy thing called the Fold. And when they're passing, they're attacked, something goes wrong, and Alina discovers that she has this ability that she didn't know that she had before, and she discovers that she's a Grisha, so she's whisked away to go train to be a Grisha in the capital, and the story goes on from there. This trilogy was amazing. Leigh Bardugo's writing is so beautiful. It's just so poetic and gorgeous, and the stories, I mean, they were kind of heart-wrenching. This trilogy was very heart-wrenching. When I finished the third book in the trilogy, I just kind of sat and stared at the wall for like an entire hour, and it was in the middle of the night too, and I just like felt hollowed out inside. I didn't know what to think. Like, it was a good ending, but it was not a good ending, and it was just like, I been put through so much of the emotional ringer throughout the series that when I finished it, I was just like, oh my gosh. But they were so good. So good. They're not like fluffy, happy books. They're, I mean, heart-wrenching, but they're really good. Very good. So I'd highly recommend them. Alright, and the last one that I want to show you of my favorite books of 2014 is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This book was the best book I have read in years. It's one of the best books I've ever read. It was so good. So ridiculously freaking good. And I read the first book, and I read half of the second book, and I was just like, I don't know what happened. I just kind of didn't finish it right away. I put it down and then didn't pick it up right immediately, even though it was so good and it was a really suspenseful part. So I'm still halfway through the second book. So I didn't read the whole trilogy in 2014, but it's still, I mean, this is my favorite book of 2014. It was so good, and I don't know why I still haven't finished the series. I really need to reread this, reread the first half of the second book, and finish the series, because this book was amazing. This book, basically, Brandon Sanderson's premise here is that what if there was a world in which the Dark Lord had won? So, like, a hero tried to rise up and defeat the bad guy and lost. And so this is 1,000 years after the hero lost, is where we are right now. And it's kind of really bad condition. Ash has been falling, mists come at night, there are no flowers, no green things, and this follows a multitude of characters, including Kelsier and Vin. It basically follows a band of thieves who decide that the greatest new heist to pull off would be to overthrow the Dark Lord. And for the leader of them, Kelsier, it's kind of because of revenge to try to get back at the Dark Lord who had murdered the woman he loved. But for a lot of them, it's just kind of, can they do it? Can they pull off this biggest possible heist? And they all have magical abilities. What was so cool, this was such a creative world that Brandon Sanderson created. His world building is amazing, and his magic system is so cool. It's called allomancy. So basically there are different metals, and when you ingest shavings of these metals, it gives you certain abilities. Mistings can only use one metal, but Mistborn, which our main character is, two of our main characters are, they have the ability to use all of the metals, and it is just so cool. The magic system was so cool. And there's another type of magic in this also called ferrochemy, which is also with metals, but instead of consuming them, you store things in them. But I just thought that this was basically one of the most amazing books that I have ever read, and I totally loved it, and I really need to finish the series because amazing. Alright, so that is it. That was my top 5 books, but really my top 5 series. All of them are in a series, just one of them I never quite finished the series in 2014, But yes, those are my top 5 series that I read for the first time in 2014. I would highly recommend each and every one of these to anyone. I mean, obviously people who like fantasy would like them more, but they were amazing and I had to make this video even though I put it off for so long. So let me know, have you read these books? What did you think of them? Are you planning on reading these books? If you haven't read them, I would highly recommend that you do. And do you have any recommendations for me? I always love recommendations, and these were my favorite books that I read in 2014. So these would be a great jumping off point. If you think of any books similar to these that you have read that you don't know if I've read, please let me know because I loved all of those books. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!